Diving is the sport of jumping or falling into water from a platform or springboard, usually while performing acrobatics. Diving is an internationally recognized sport that is part of the Olympic Games. In addition, unstructured and non-competitive diving is a recreational pastime. Diving is one of the most popular Olympic sports with spectators. Competitors possess many of the same characteristics as gymnasts and dancers, including strength, flexibility, kinesthetic judgment and air awareness. Some professional divers were originally gymnasts or dancers, as both the sports have similar characteristics to diving. History. Plunging. Although diving has been a popular pastime across the world since ancient times, the first modern diving competitions were held in England in the 1880s. The exact origins of the sport are unclear, though it likely derives from the act of diving at the start of swimming races. The 1904 book Swimming by Ralph Thomas notes English reports of plunging records dating back to at least 1865. The 1877 addition to British Rural Sports by John Henry Walsh makes note of a Mr. Young plunging 56 feet in 1870, and also states that 25 years prior, a swimmer named Drake could cover 53 feet. The English Amateur Swimming Association first started a plunging championship in 1883. The plunging championship was discontinued in 1937. Fancy diving. Diving into a body of water had also been a method used by gymnasts in Germany and Sweden since the early 19th century. The soft landing allowed for more elaborate gymnastic feats in midair, as the jump could be made at a greater distance. This tradition evolved into fancy diving, while diving as a preliminary to swimming became known as plain diving. In England, the practice of high diving, diving from a great height, gained popularity. The first diving stages were erected at the Highgate Ponds at a height of 15 feet in 1893 in the first World Championship event. The National Graceful Diving Competition was held by the Royal Life Saving Society in 1895. The event consisted of standing and running dives from either 15 or 30 feet. It was at this event that the Swedish tradition of fancy diving was introduced to the sport by the athletes Otto Hagborg and C.F. Moritz. They demonstrated their acrobatic techniques from the 10 meters diving board at Highgate Pond and stimulated the establishment of the Amateur Diving Association in 1901, the first organization devoted to diving in the world. Fancy diving was formally introduced into the championship in 1903. Olympic-era plain diving was first introduced into the Olympics at the 1904 event. The 1908 Olympics in London added fancy diving and introduced elastic boards rather than fixed platforms. Women were first allowed to participate in the diving events for the 1912 Olympics in Stockholm. In the 1928 Olympics, plain and fancy diving was amalgamated into one event, highboard diving. The diving event was first held indoors in the Empire Pool for the 1934 British Empire Games and 1948 Summer Olympics in London. Competitive diving. Most diving competitions consist of 3 disciplines: 1 meter and 3 meters springboards, and the platform. Competitive athletes are divided by gender, and often by age group. In platform events, competitors are allowed to perform the dives on either the 5, 7.5, 9, or 10-meter towers. In major diving meets, including the Olympic Games and the World Championships, platform diving is from the 10-meter height. Divers have to perform a set number of dives according to established requirements, including somersaults and twists. Divers are judged on whether and how well they completed all aspects of the dive, the conformance of the body to the requirements of the dive, and the amount of splash created by their entry to the water. A possible score out of 10 is broken down into 3 points for the takeoff, 3 for the flight, and 3 for the entry, with 1 more available to give the judges flexibility. The raw score is multiplied by a difficulty factor, derived from the number and combination of movements attempted. The diver with the highest total score after a sequence of dives is declared the winner. Synchronized diving. Synchronized diving was adopted as an Olympic sport in 2000. 2 divers form a team and perform dives simultaneously. The dives are identical. It used to be possible to dive opposites, also known as a pinwheel, but this is no longer part of competitive synchronized diving. For example, one diver would perform a forward dive and the other an inward dive in the same position, or one would do a reverse and the other a back movement. In these events, the diving would be judged both on the quality of execution and the synchronicity in timing of takeoff and entry, height and forward travel. Scoring the dive. There are rules governing the scoring of a dive. Usually a score considers 3 elements of the dive: the approach, the flight, and the entry. The primary factors affecting the scoring are, if a handstand is required, the length of time and quality of the hold, the height of the diver at the apex of the dive, with extra height resulting in a higher score, the distance of the diver from the diving apparatus throughout the dive of the platform, the properly defined body position of the diver according to the dive being performed, including pointed toes and feet touching at all times, the proper amounts of rotation and revolution upon completion of the dive and entry into the water. Angle of entry. A diver should enter the water straight without any angle. Amount of splash. Many judges award divers for the amount of splash created by the diver on entry, with less splash resulting in a higher score. To reduce the subjectivity of scoring in major meets, panels of 5 or 7 judges are assembled. If 5 judges, then the highest and lowest scores are discarded and the middle 3 are summed and multiplied by the degree of difficulty, which is determined from a combination of the moves undertaken, in which position, and from what height. In major international events, there are 7 judges, in which case the highest and lowest scores are again discarded and the middle 5 are summed, then multiplied by 3/5 and multiplied by the DD, so as to provide consistent comparison with 5-judge events. Accordingly, it is extremely difficult for one judge to manipulate scores. This 7-judge procedure has been modified as of the 2012 London Olympics. Rather than eliminating one high and one low award and then reducing the total by 3/5 as in previous international events, the 2 highest awards and the 2 lowest are disregarded, leaving 3 to be summed and multiplied by the difficulty rating. There is a general misconception about scoring and judging. In serious meets, the absolute score is somewhat meaningless. It is the relative score, not the absolute score, that wins meets. Accordingly, good judging implies consistent scoring across the dives. Specifically, if a judge consistently gives low scores for all divers, or consistently gives high scores for the same divers, the judging will yield fair relative results and will cause divers to place in the correct order. However, absolute scores have significance to the individual divers. Besides the obvious instances of setting records, absolute scores are also used for rankings and qualifications for higher-level meets. In synchronized diving events, there is a panel of 7, 9, or 11 judges, 2 or 3 to mark the execution of one diver, 2 or 3 to mark the execution of the other, and the remaining 3 or 5 to judge the synchronization. The execution judges are positioned 2 on each side of the pool, and they score the diver which is nearer to them. The 2012 London Olympics saw the first use of a 11 judges. The score is computed similarly to the scores from other diving events, but has been modified starting with the 2012 London Olympics for the use of the larger judging panels. Each group of judges will have the highest and lowest scores dropped, leaving the middle score for each diver's execution and the 3 middle scores for synchronization. The total is then weighted by 3/5 and multiplied by the DD. The result is that the emphasis is on the synchronization of the divers. The synchronization scores are based on time of takeoff, height attained, synchronization of rotations and twists, time of entry to the water, forward travel from the board. The judges may also disqualify the diver for certain violations during the dive, including receiving a score of 0 on all dives performed in the event, improper equipment usage, competitive strategy to win dive meets. Divers create a dive list in advance of the meet. To win the meet, the diver must accumulate more points than other divers. Often, simple dives with low DDs will look good to spectators but will not win meets. The competitive diver will attempt the highest DD dives possible with which they can achieve consistent high scores. If divers are scoring 8 or 9 on most dives, it may be a sign of their extreme skill, or it may be a sign that the dive list is not competitive, and they may lose the meet to a diver with higher DDs and lower scores. In competition, divers must submit the lists beforehand, and once past a deadline they cannot change their dives. If they fail to perform the dive announced, even if they physically cannot execute the dive announced, or if they perform a more difficult dive, they will receive a score of 0. Under exceptional circumstances, a redive may be granted, but these are exceedingly rare. In the Olympics or other highly competitive meets, many divers will have nearly the same list of dives as the competitors. The importance for divers competing at this level is not so much the DD, but how they arrange the list. Once the more difficult rounds of dives begin, it is important to lead off with a confident dive to build momentum. They also tend to put a very confident dive in front of a very difficult dive to ensure that they will have a good mentality for the difficult dive. Most divers have pre-dive and post-dive rituals that help them either maintain or regain focus. Coaches also play a role in this aspect of the sport. Many divers rely on their coaches to help keep the composure during the meet. In a large meet, coaches are rarely allowed on the deck to talk to their athletes, so it is common to see coaches using hand gestures or body movements to communicate. There are some American meets which will allow changes of the position of the dive even after the dive has been announced immediately before execution, but these are an exception to the rules generally observed internationally. Generally, NCAA rules allow for dives to be changed while the diver is on the board, but the diver must request the change directly after the dive is announced. This applies especially in cases where the wrong dive is announced. If the diver pauses during his or her hurdle to ask for a change of dive, it will be declared a balk and the change of dive will not be permitted. Under FINA law, no dive may be changed after the deadline for the dive sheet to be submitted. It is the diver's responsibility to ensure that the dive sheet is filled in correctly, and also to correct the referee or announcer before the dive if they describe it incorrectly. If a dive is performed which is as submitted but not as announced, it is declared failed and scores 0 according to a strict reading of the FINA law. But in practice, a redive would usually be granted in these circumstances. Governance. The global governing body of diving is FINA, which also governs swimming, synchronized swimming, water polo and open water swimming. Almost invariably, at national level, diving shares a governing body with the other aquatic sports. This is frequently a source of political friction, as the committees are naturally dominated by swimming officials who do not necessarily share or understand the concerns of the diving community. Divers often feel, for example, that they do not get adequate support over issues like the provision of facilities. Other areas of concern are the selection of personnel for the specialized diving committees and for coaching and officiating at events, and the team selection for international competitions. There are sometimes attempts to separate the governing body as a means to resolve these frustrations, but they are rarely successful. For example, in the UK, the Great Britain Diving Federation was formed in 1992 with the intention of taking over the governance of diving from the ASHA. Although it initially received widespread support from the diving community, the FINA requirement that international competitors had to be registered with the national governing body was a major factor in the abandonment of this ambition a few years later. Since FINA refused to rescind recognition of the ASHA as the British governing body for all aquatic sports including diving, this meant that the elite divers had to belong to ASHA-affiliated clubs to be eligible for selection to international competition. In the United States, scholastic diving is almost always part of the school swim team. Diving is a separate sport in Olympic and club diving. The NCAA will separate diving from swimming in special diving competitions after the swim season is completed. Safety. Despite the apparent risk, the statistical incidence of injury in supervised training and competition is extremely low. The majority of accidents that are classified as diving-related are incidents caused by individuals jumping from structures such as bridges or piers into water of inadequate depth. Many accidents also occur when divers do not account for rocks and logs in the water. Because of this, many beaches and pools prohibit diving in shallow waters or when a lifeguard is not on duty. After an incident in Washington in 1993, most U.S. and other pool builders are reluctant to equip a residential swimming pool with a diving springboard, so home diving pools are much less common these days. In the incident, 14-year-old Sean Manili made a suicide dive in a private swimming pool and became a tetraplegic. The lawyers for the family, Jan Eric Peterson and Fred Zeder, successfully sued the diving board manufacturer, the pool builder, and the National Spa and Pool Institute over the inappropriate depth of the pool. The NSPI had specified a minimum depth of 7 feet 6 in, which proved to be insufficient in the above case. The pool into which Manili dived was not constructed to the published standards. The standards had changed after the diving board was installed on the non-compliant pool by the homeowner, but the courts held that the pool was close enough to the standards to hold NSPI liable. The multi-million-dollar lawsuit was eventually resolved in 2001 for $6.6 million in favor of the plaintiff. The NSPI was held to be liable and was financially strained by the case. It filed twice for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection and was successfully reorganized into a new swimming pool industry association. In competitive diving, FINA takes regulatory steps to ensure that athletes are protected from the inherent dangers of the sport. For example, they impose restrictions according to age on the heights of platforms which divers may compete on. Group D, 5 meters. Group C, 5 meters and AMP, 7.5 meters. Group B, 5 meters, 7.5 meters and AMP, 10 meters. Group A 5 meters, 7.5 meters and AMP 10 meters. Group D divers have only recently been allowed to compete on the tower. In the past, the age group could compete only springboard, to discourage children from taking on the greater risks of tower diving. Group D tower was introduced to counteract the phenomenon of coaches pushing young divers to compete in higher age categories, thus putting them at even greater risk. However, some divers may safely dive in higher age categories to dive on higher platforms. Usually this occurs when advanced Group C divers wish to compete on the 10 meters. Points on pool depths in connection with safety. Most competition pools are 5 meters deep for 10 meters platform and 4 meters deep for 5 meters platform or 3 meters springboard. These are currently the FINA recommended minimum depths. Some are deeper, e.g. 6 meters for the diving pit at Sheffield, England. Diving from 10 meters and maintaining a downward streamlined position results in gliding to a stop at about 4.5 to 5 meters. High standard competition divers rarely go more than about 2.5 meters below the surface as they roll in the direction of the dive's rotation. This is a technique to produce a clean entry. Attempting to scoop the trajectory underwater against the rotation is extremely inadvisable as it can cause serious back injuries. Hitting the water flat from 10 meters brings the diver to rest in about 1 foot. The extreme deceleration causes severe bruising, both internal and external, strains to connective tissue securing the organs and possible minor hemorrhage to lungs and other tissue. This is very painful and distressing, but not life-threatening. Dive groups. There are 6 groups into which dives are classified: forward, back, inward, reverse, twist, and arm stand. The latter applies only to platform competitions, whereas the other 5 apply to both springboard and platform. In the forward group, the diver takes off facing forward and rotates forward. In the back group, the diver takes off with the back to the water and rotates backward. In the reverse group, the diver takes off facing forward and rotates backward. In the inward group, the diver takes off with the back to the water and rotates forward. Any dive incorporating an axial twisting movement is in the twist group. Any dive commencing from a handstand is in the arm stand group. Dive positions during the flight of the dive. One of 4 positions is assumed: straight, with no bend at the knees or hips; pike, with knees straight but a tight bend at the hips. The open pike is a variant where the arms are reached to the side, and the legs are brought straight out with a bend in the hips. Tuck, body folded up in a tight ball, hands holding the shins and toes pointed. Free indicates a twisting dive, and a combination of other positions. In the transition between 2 positions, the diver may, for example, bend the legs a curve at the waist, and points will not be deducted for doing so. These positions are referred to by the letters A, B, C and D respectively. Additionally, some dives can be started in a flying position. The body is kept straight with the arms extended to the side, and the regular dive position is assumed at about half the dive. Difficulty is rated according to the degree of difficulty of the dives. Some divers may find pike easier in a flip than tuck, and most find straight the easiest in a front-back dive, although it is still rated the most difficult because of the risk of over-rotation. Dive numbers. In competition, the dives are referred to by a schematic system of 3 or 4-digit numbers. The letter to indicate the position is appended to the end of the number. The first digit of the number indicates the dive group as defined above. For groups 1 to 4, the number consists of 3 digits and a letter of the alphabet. The third digit represents the number of half somersaults. The second digit is either 0 or 1, with 0 representing a normal somersault, and 1 signifying a flying variation of the basic movement. No flying dive has been competed at a high-level competition for many years. For example, 101 forward dive straight, 203 back 1.5 somersaults tuck, 305 reverse 2.5 somersaults tuck, 113 flying forward 1.5 somersaults pike. For Group 5, the dive number has 4 digits. The first digit indicates that it is a twisting dive. The second digit indicates the group of the underlying movement. The third digit indicates the number of half somersaults. And the fourth indicates the number of half twists. For example, 5211 bag dive, half twist, straight position, 5337D, reverse 1.5 somersaults with 3.5 twists, in the free position. For Group 6 arm stand, the dive number has either 3 or 4 digits, 3 digits for dives without twist and 4 for dives with twists. In non-twisting arm stand dives, the second digit indicates the direction of rotation and the third digit indicates the number of half somersaults. Inward rotating arm stand dives have never been performed, and are generally regarded as physically impossible. For example, 600A arm stand dive straight, 612B arm stand forward somersault pike, 624C arm stand back double somersault tuck. For twisting arm stand dives, the dive number again has 4 digits, but rather than beginning with the number 5, the number 6 remains as the first digit, indicating that the twister will be performed from an arm stand. The second digit indicates the direction of rotation, as above. The third is the number of half somersaults, and the fourth is the number of half twists, e.g. 6243D, arm stand back double somersault with 1.5 twists in the free position. All of these dives come with DD. This is an indication of how difficult, complex a dive is. The score that the dive receives is multiplied by the DD to give the dive a final score. Before a diver competes, they must decide on a list. This is a number of optional dives and compulsory dives. The optionals come with a DD limit. This means that a diver must select X number of dives and the combined DD limit must be no more than the limit set by the competition organization, etc. Until the mid-1990s, the tariff was decided by the FINA Diving Committee, and divers could only select from the range of dives in the published tariff table. Since then, the tariff is calculated by a formula based on various factors such as the number of twist and somersaults, the height, the group, etc. And divers are free to submit new combinations. This change was implemented because new dives were being invented too frequently for an annual meeting to accommodate the progress of the sport.